Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Speaking to you from beautiful Dartmouth. The rain is coming down, but just like spring out there.
Councillor Stoddard.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and fellow councillors, coming to you from City Hall.
Nice. Councillor Russell.
And good afternoon from Lower Sackville. Hopefully, because it is spring, we won't have any more snow. So have a great afternoon.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor Otis.
Hi, folks, from still sunny Bedford. We're sending all the rain to Dartmouth. Looking forward to seeing how you chair a meeting, Becky. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Chop, chop. We're going to get this done. Thank you. And of course, myself from District 3. Pleased to be here. And Tony, it's not raining out here in beautiful Eastern Passage, so people complain often about the fog or whatever, but we're often even better than other parts of HRM. So with that, we'll move on and do approval of minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review them?
I have. I'm happy to move acceptance.
January 21st, 2021.
I'm happy to move acceptance if that's helpful.
Thank you.
I will second that.
Seconded by Councillor Russell. Thank you. And should I call for the question? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hearing no opposition, we will carry that motion. Thank you. And we'll move on to approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Madam Clerk, are there any additions that we should be aware of at this moment?
Yes, Madam Chair, there is the addition of item 15.1, which is a motion from Councillor Mason, subsequent to his notice of motion at the January meeting, and all members of the standing committee approved to that addition. Okay,
good. So at this point, I will ask if we have any further from any committee members. Hearing none, we'll move on. Ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Seconded.
So moved by Councillor Upton and seconded by Councillor Russell. And I'll call the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. And the motion is carried. And we now move on to business arising out of the minutes. I'm recognizing that there are none of those, so we move on to the call for declaration of conflict of interest. Any conflict of interest declarations today? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to motions of reconsideration, and I understand that there are none as well. And we'll move on to motions of rescission, where there are also none. And it looks like we now can proceed with consideration of deferred business from January 21st, 2021. We have 8.1, which is a revisit of the pedestrian push buttons. I believe there is a staff presentation.
Yes, Councillor Kent, it's Brad Anguish, Director of Transportation and Public Works. Oh, sorry, Executive Director of Transportation and Public Works. We're here today to present on a motion from Council. And if it's okay with you, we'll start right away.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be with the committee today. I'll just start off by situating this presentation in that it is, as a result of the motion that's in your report regarding pedestrian push buttons, that the Transportation Standing Committee requests a staff report to be completed within 120 days that outlines how, generally, pedestrian push buttons in the regional center, the predominantly residential transit suburb areas of the attached map, and in other appropriate areas throughout HRM can be used to activate the audible pedestrian beacons only, and be prominently labeled as such, with the work to be completed by September 2021. So I appreciate the committee allowing us the opportunity to do this presentation, as it is a bit of a complex issue at times. And so I also, in preparing for the meeting, we were asked by the committee chairs to do a bit of an introduction on the integrated mobility plan and how it interfaces with this issue. So I will apologize. I am going to do the front end of this presentation. It is very difficult to do an IMP introduction in a couple minutes. So I'm going to take about 5 or 10, but I can promise you it won't do any justice to the subject. However, I have asked Tanya Davis to be with us today. She is, of course, one of the quarterbacks of the plan. And so therefore, if there are questions around the IMP, she's here as well. So without further ado, oh, sorry. And I also have, of course, my team with me, Tasso Kucharlakis and Roddy McIntyre from our Traffic and Right-of-Way Division. And of course, Tasso is also the Traffic Authority. So with that, right here, this initial slide is just the cover of the integrated mobility plan for those who haven't had the chance to see it yet. Next slide. Okay, so the presentation today is ultimately going to end with our recommendation of basically moving our 278 signal network to move from 38% of the network being on pedestrian recall to 72% of the network being on pedestrian recall, a significant change there, as well as changing the accessible pedestrian signals from 3 seconds to the single push so that there is equality for everyone. And Tasso will present after me and go into details about the staff recommendation. In terms of the IMP, basically, in 2017, Council unanimously adopted the IMP. It's a strategic priorities plan that integrates with the regional plan and gets implemented through budget and business planning, quite a bit of which you saw yesterday. The IMP supports growth, development, transportation of goods and peoples of all ages and abilities using all modes, including walking, cycling, transit, motor vehicles, and it's consistent with the regional plan. Next slide. So the big move here is by 2031, in accordance with the regional plan, at least 30% of all trips will be made by walking, cycling, and transit. As you can see from the census data, we were declining up until 2016. 2021, barring impacts from COVID, we should see another census result. And of course, we would hope to see an improvement. Next slide. The share targets by region are outlined in this slide. I won't go into them in detail. Obviously, it's a 30% average across the region, but of course, the mode shift targets or more mode share targets do distribute differently throughout the size of our municipality, whether you're in the regional center, inner suburban, or outer suburban. Next slide. I put up these indicators. This is something that the strategic transportation planning staff in planning and development has been producing on a regular basis throughout COVID. And I'm not going to drill into the details in this. I just want to show kind of where we are with the impacts of COVID and how things are recovering or not. And so in this snapshot look, like I said, I won't drill down. What you see is over a 24-hour period, the traffic volumes as measured at the bridges, because that's where we measure it, is over a 24-hour period is almost back to where we were in 2019. And I do say 2019 because that's where the kind of last data point we have from the bridges that is comparable. But it is also worth noting that the peaks are down about 15 to 18%. About 15% overall, AM peak, PM peak. So when people talk about their feel of congestion right now, you know, it's a subtle change in overall traffic volume. However, it is a significant change, 15% in the peaks. As well, it's worth looking at, you know, based on the counts that we have, for transit, we're down 52% and pedestrian volumes down 56% from where we were. So I'll come back to that. Like I said, I wasn't going to drill into the details of that today, but it becomes a factor in some of my comments later on. Next slide. So the pillars of an integrated mobility plan are laid out below. It's about being connected, healthy, affordable, and sustainable. Won't drill into all of these. I think council's very familiar with these concepts. Next slide. The key principles of the IMP are complete communities, where we cluster complete communities around public transit, employment, shops, and services. It's about moving people. That's moving people and goods instead of focusing solely on vehicles. Managing congestion. Manage the congestion instead of attempting to eliminate it. And that's where we'll focus in a little bit today. And then integrate our solutions. There is no one basic silver bullet in the mobility game. And so what you're seeing is a whole variety of initiatives being put in place to try and solve this challenge. Next slide. So, one thing I should say, there's 137 actions that are laid out in the integrated mobility plan. And so those pillars and the principles are what staff applies when looking at how we're going to implement the actions, the priority get, the weight they get. And so that's the guidance to staff. Of course, there's a lot more detail in the IMP around each and every action, but I won't, again, drill into it today. One narrow piece of the IMP that applies today, which I thought I'd just zero in on, is the road network. And a couple of the key points here is about managing congestion rather than eliminating it. I'm just going to, hopefully the link is going to work here and show you just a quick little film that is helpful with that. In fact, maybe I'll go to it now if the clerk could maybe give that a click and see if it'll fly for us. How about a double click? Maybe it's loading.
Just a moment, it started. I just need to stop sharing this.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Sharing the YouTube video. Just give me a moment.
Perfect, thanks.
While waiting, I would like to acknowledge Councillor Curry has joined the meeting and participating as well.
Sorry.
Is there a chance to get volume by chance?
Yeah, just a second.
Okay, thanks.
Like the videos on the right-hand side.
Yeah, we have video, but there should be like an audio share button in the Teams, but for some reason it's
And
not in my
that
settings.
happens, that is a checkbox when you start the share of your screen, and it should be there.
And it's not, unfortunately. I'm just going to see, there's another producer in the meeting. I'm just going to see if he can do it.
So maybe what I'll do is I'll keep moving along just while we're working on that.
Yeah.
So the other piece of this is around, so there's managing congestion, there is identifying and developing plans for strategic corridors. Much of what you saw, you saw those mobility projects, about a dozen of them starting in various forms within our capital plan yesterday. So you're starting to see all the work going on around strategic corridors, and they become a critical part of the plan for mobility in our region. Of course, you know about the revisions coming on the Red Book, and the multimodal guidelines are well on their way. One of the things we'll be talking about today, and one of the cheapest ways of helping to manage congestion, is the use of our traffic signal technology. And of course, there's data collection going on as well. In terms of, I'll try and fill in the blanks as best I can on the video, but essentially, in terms of managing congestion, what it's all about is it's not about widening roads. That's proven over time to be an unsuccessful strategy. It just leads to really more use of single occupant vehicles and increased traffic. It'll just fill the space and things continue to get worse at a higher cost. So basically, you know, the IMP for in general really focuses on things like transportation demand management, flex work hours. It works on AT, the provision of AT, the provision of bus rapid transit. I think council is very familiar with all the various strategies about trying to reduce the congestion while holding the line on the width of our roads, if you will, the total lane kilometers within the system. That is a very important piece that I want to drive home at this point before I turn it over to Tasso, because just to think about growth in our region, if you think back to 2001, I can tell you the population of HRM was about 360,000 people. Fast forward to 2021, we're at 450,000 people, so we've grown 90,000 people. So that, you know, that's an interesting number. If you think about it in terms of little municipalities, think about it this way. We've grown 22 towns of Windsor since, in other words, we've grown one Windsor every year for the last 20 years. We've grown 7.5 Truro. And if that's boggling your mind, just think of it as we've grown one entire Cape Breton regional municipality over those 20 years. Now, if you think about what we've done with the road network, especially as it pertains to the peninsula, I think most of you are aware of that history. There hasn't been much road widening. We continue to push the sprawl has continued in our community over that period. The congestion has continued. And of course, quite frankly, the congestion grows. As it sits today, if you look at TomTom, which is basically a tool that measures congestion, and basically HRM's ranked 6th in Canada in terms of congestion, which is actually, if you think about a relative population, it would be considered high. So congestion becomes a factor, and why I'm bringing this up is that congestion is one of the leading reasons why we have distracted driving. Basically, distracted driving is born out of the ability to start to read your device while sitting in traffic. It leads to aggressive driving because, of course, everybody wants to keep their commute times or wherever they're going at the time they've allowed. And of course, as you know, whether it's construction or whether it's congestion, you know, people are trying to arrive and they'll get aggressive. And that obviously leads to shortcutting. And if you think and where does shortcutting lead us? It leads us to where we were yesterday, looking at traffic calming being spread wide across our municipality. In terms of the, you know, especially as it pertains to the residential areas, if you think about history there, you know, in Councillor Cleary's district about 15 to 18 years ago was really the first traffic calming put into Armview Prior and Armview Prior Jubilee. And that was quite controversial at the time. There was a lot before that actually happened, but that was the first recognition that shortcutting was occurring in residential areas. Fast forward to where we are today and the problems and challenges that councillors are hearing at the door. So congestion does play a role. So that's kind of the IMP intro to this today, because I just really wanted to grab one sliver, kind of understand the dynamics of what's going on. Because again, the strategy that we're taking with IMP is about narrowing the lanes. It is about coming up with engineering solutions for traffic calming, be it bump outs, be it chicanes, be it islands, be it traffic humps. We're obviously starting to talk about photo enforcement on the major collectors and arterials. You know, our game plan is to really slow down traffic. And so while we continue to grow, we grew by 10,000 last year, we're pushing, and I'll leave it to you to understand where they might have moved and what modes of travel they may be taking. And that's where I come back to that previous slide where we see transit down quite a bit. We see pedestrian activity down quite a bit, but we see the car use quite high. That is a concern moving forward. So while the IMP is our long-term plan to get there, we're going to have to help manage these things in the meantime. We've got a journey to go through. And in terms of congestion, you know, it's clear. We do expect it to get worse before it gets better. And so there'll have to be lots of elements of this plan put in place aggressively to make sure that we can balance it all. So with that introduction, I want to turn over to Tasso so he can now tell you how the traffic signals play a role and how that drills into our solution that we're putting forward today regarding the push button operation of our signal system. Over to Tasso. Thank you.
Excuse me, Brad. It's Andrea speaking. We do have the ability to send the IMP video live with audio if you want to do that.
Oh, I'd love to do it because I know I did a lousy job of that. So.
All right, I will stop sharing my screen so that Liam Power can share his.
We're still hearing no audio. Liam, it could be because you're muted.
And transit networks to support that growth. There are Welcome to the Integrated Mobility Plan. The Integrated Mobility Plan, or the IMP, is Halifax's plan for improving transportation across the region. The goal is to provide connected, healthy, affordable, and sustainable ways to move people and goods. As our city grows, we need to make sure that our walking, cycling, and transit networks support that growth. There are 4 principles to the IMP: complete communities, moving people, managing congestion, and integrated solutions. Here we are focusing on managing congestion. Traditionally, the approach has been to attempt to eliminate congestion by building more traffic lanes or roads. The idea was that with more space dedicated to driving, vehicles could flow more freely. This short-term solution ends up having the opposite effect. It attracts more vehicle traffic, creating more congestion, followed by requests for additional traffic lanes or roads. This creates a repetitive cycle. Instead, the IMP attempts to manage congestion by using tactics such as encouraging people to walk, cycle, use transit, or carpool. Encouraging people to shift their work hours so not everyone is on the road during peak hours, 7 to 9 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m. Encouraging people to work from home or telework to reduce their need to be on the roadway network. These strategies help us to better use the roads we have instead of adding new roads or traffic lanes. They help to save money, reduce the impact on the planet, and make our roads safer. If 1 out of 10 people stop driving alone during peak hours, we would see a 30% decrease in congestion in the region. Our plans for improving mobility work together with the plans and policies that are shaping the future of Halifax. This has lots of benefits, like managing congestion, air quality improvements, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, ease of movement for people of all ages and abilities, more vibrant, livable, and walkable neighborhoods, safer mobility solutions, lower transportation costs, and healthier communities. For more information on the Integrated Mobility Plan, go to halifax.ca/integrated mobility. Welcome to the
Super, thank you so much. And thanks to Tanya and the team at Strategic Transportation Planning for putting that video together. As you can imagine, at the offices in traffic and right of way and TPW in general, we get a lot of complaints about slowing down traffic rather than moving it faster. Why aren't we building bigger streets, more lanes? The project we did on Forest Hills Parkway last year with our Greenway was over the last 2 years, I should say, was a huge communications exercise, a very difficult one, because when they saw the size of the construction, everybody expected it was going to be a 4-lane road when finished. Of course, it wasn't, and it's exactly what the IMP calls for. I would encourage any councillors that are getting calls on this subject. We found that by distributing the video link, it does help us. It doesn't necessarily take away anybody's disappointment, but it does help explain what we're doing and why traffic flow is not our top, traffic volume is not our top priority. And so with that, I'm going to try again to kick it over to Tasso. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. It's Tasso Koutrelakis, Manager of Traffic Management. Next slide, please. Before I continue, because I will be showing some numbers in the following slides, I just want to point out to the committee that the numbers on these slides are slightly different than what's in the report. The reason being twofold. Number one, since we wrote the report, we brought on 4 new traffic signals in the network. 2 full signalized intersections and 2 pedestrian half signals. So we updated the slide just to reflect the new intersection coming online. In addition, that after the report was submitted, Councillor Austin brought to our attention an intersection in Dartmouth, Prince Albert and Hawthorne, where he questioned why it wasn't on pedestrian recall. And in fact, we just made an error in the spreadsheet. Currently, that intersection is on pedestrian recall. So combining those issues, the numbers in these slides are slightly different, like maybe by 1 or 2 than in the report. So Brad touched on some of these things, so I apologize if I repeat myself. So the benefit of traffic signal optimization, and just, I should back up again. Council approved the project approximately 6 or 7 years ago to upgrade the traffic signal system in HRM, and that involved buying the back-end software that we could remotely adjust signal times and optimize the signal network, and also the replacement of on-street equipment at 90 intersections in the city, and primarily on the Halifax Peninsula. Since then, we've been slowly integrating other intersections into the network, and currently we're up to about 85% completion. And our intent is to hook up the remaining traffic signals to our system by the end of next fiscal year. So the benefits of traffic signal optimization are several, but I just highlight some key ones. Improved transit. As you can appreciate, the more efficient that we can make the network, the shorter queues. It helps maintain transit schedule, and also supports the other transit initiative, the transit signal priority. And those are the signals that we use at certain intersections, that when transit gets to the front of the queue, they get a special signal and they can jump the queue. So the shorter the queue, the quicker they can get up to the front of the queue and then get the signal to jump the queue. The other issue, another benefit, is improved emergency response, especially on our major corridors on the peninsula, Quimple Road, Roby Street. Very important to maintain the traffic flow in those streets, because those are the key key routes to the hospitals. In addition to fire services, they primarily stick to primary or arterial routes. Where we've also implemented traffic signal preemption hardware, which gives fire trucks the ability to respond quicker to emergencies by either A, if they come to a traffic signal where there is a green light, the system will hold the green light until the fire truck gets through, or B, if they're coming up to a red light, the system will speed itself so they can get the green light quicker. The other benefit is reduced greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, just a linear thing that less queuing, less idling, less greenhouse emissions, which supports the Halifax objectives. And as Brad alluded to, improved road safety, reduced aggressive driving. We've all been seeing the results of excessive queues, whether it's from a collision or from a construction project, and you see motorists performing aggressive maneuvers such as doing U-turns within an intersection or turning into driveways quite hastily. So that's obviously an issue, and the shortcutting. And just to expand on a bit on the example that Brad used, he's absolutely right. It was a very controversial process back in the day with respect to the shortcutting in Armview prior Jubilee. One of the things coming out of that was, how do we make Quimper Road more efficient? How do we move more traffic on Quimper Road to encourage more traffic to use the road that it's been designed to carry that amount of traffic versus having traffic going through a residential neighborhood? And one of the things that we did at the time was to convert the crosswalk lights on Quimper Road at Beach and at Harvard to half signals, because that would give us the ability to coordinate all of the traffic signals within that corridor and maximize the efficiency of that network. I should point out that all of the main corridors into the peninsula, given the fact that we have very limited corridors, that's what we try to do. We try to maximize the efficiency of those corridors into the peninsula, given the impact to in addition to regular traffic, but emergency response and in transit and other movements. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just taking a bit of a little more detail into traffic signal operation, traffic signals are used to assign the right of way at busy intersections. And it is a very complex topic, and it's very technical, so it's very difficult to describe how it all works. But in essence, when it comes down to it, what we do is, we need to consider all users and directions together when we design a signal network. And when you make a change for one particular user, it impacts all users. And just giving you an example, often we get asked to increase the green time in a particular direction, or add a left turn face, or increase a walk time. That has an impact on the overall intersection performance by increasing the overall cycle length, which means that all users have to wait a little bit longer to receive their cue to proceed safely. In addition to that, you can't look at an intersection in isolation. If they're part of an overall corridor with several traffic signals, making one change at one intersection has a significant impact upstream and downstream of that intersection. So again, these main corridors that we have several intersections, that is an important consideration. So we need to balance operation based on demand to provide safe and efficient movement of all users while minimizing delay for everyone. Next slide. So as per Council's direction, I just want to highlight some of the criteria that we use to select locations for pedestrian recall. So the main considerations that we took in consideration is location, pedestrian activity, other modes, whether there's transit, good movements, etc., and roadway function and geometry. So the original motion spoke to reviewing the traffic signals within a certain transit hub area as per a report produced external to HRM. Once we took a closer look at that, it didn't really line up with the internal transit plans. So we said we might as well review all 278 intersections that we have in our network. So once we completed that review, we identified an additional 23 signals to be set to pedestrian recall for all crossings and 71 signals to be set to pedestrian recall for side street crossings. Next slide. So as I said, in total, we have 278 traffic signals. Currently, 30 to 80% of those have some type of pedestrian recall, whether all crossings or side street crossings. As a result of a review, we're recommending to change that to almost double that to 72% of all traffic signals that would have pedestrian recall, whether all crossings or just or side street crossings. Next slide. So what the change that we're proposing is to implement recall at the identified locations, adjust times for pedestrian recall at existing locations. So right now, pedestrian recall, and I should explain just to be clear, pedestrian recall, it means that if there's a button present, you don't have to press it, okay? And so right now, the times where that is in effect, it's somewhat inconsistent. Most locations we have from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. where you're not required to press a push button of those locations identified. Some was 7 to 9, some 7 to 10. So we looked at it, and we're proposing to change that to 6 a.m. to midnight to provide consistency and predictability throughout the network as a pedestrian. Originally, we were thinking about taking it back to 10 p.m., but based on some further feedback, and especially since some of these intersections are located adjacent to transit hubs, and transit service wraps up around midnight, we're proposing to extend that to midnight right now. And that would include the times where pedestrian activity is at its highest. In addition to that, we need to install decals to indicate times when the buttons would be required to activate the pedestrian signal. Next slide. Also, part of the recommendation makes reference to accessible pedestrian signals. And currently, they require the user to press and hold the button for 3 seconds to activate an audible signal. And the feedback that we've received from advocates in the visually impaired community, this can be problematic for those using mobility aids or have physical limitations that make holding the button difficult. So what we are proposing to do is to reconfigure the APS to allow for single press operation. So the 3-second hold would no longer be required. The audible signal would be activated by a single press of the button, and that would result in easier operation for those who require the audible signal. I should point out that the 3-second hold originally came from national guidance, and the theory behind that was to only, the 3-second allows somebody who does need the audible signal to cross the street to press a button to get just the walk signal, and this would result in only bringing up the audible signal when it truly is required. I should highlight that it's even in the report that one of the risks is that this could lead to some additional complaints, especially at traffic signals adjacent to residential areas, about noise complaints. But once you balance the factors, I believe this is a reasonable approach to take to have the APS come up every time the button is pressed. Next slide. As the impacts related to pedestrian recall are as follows. The pedestrian recall operation means that the traffic signals will continually cycle even where there's no demand. So that would increase delay to transit, cyclists, good movements, and pedestrians. In certain circumstances, impact to fire emergency response. So as I said earlier, the way the fire preemption system works is that if a fire truck comes up to a green light and they're responding to emergency, the green light is being held until such time as they clear the intersection. But if they come up to a red light, it would speed up the green on the side street to get the green on the main street as soon as possible. However, in cases of pedestrian recall, we would never shorten that phase because we need to leave that phase in place to allow for the safe crossing of a pedestrian crossing the main artery. So in some circumstances, that could impact fire emergency response. Increased congestion, more vehicle idling, and increased emissions. And as noted earlier, safety impacts resulting from driver frustration waiting into a queue, thereby resulting in ignoring signals when there's no demand or the other movement being served. And of course, these things run contrary to other HRM initiatives such as the Moving Forward Together Plan, AT Priorities Plan, Halifax, etc. What I find difficult, it is difficult to explain without providing a bit of a picture and example. So I'll try to do my best to kind of to explain the impacts. And I'll use some recent examples and some older examples. So more recent example that comes to mind is, Madam Chair, you brought to our attention a complaint from a resident about the traffic signals at Highway 111 and Pleasant Street, that there's something wrong here. The lights are continually cycling, traffic is backing up for no reason. I use this intersection 100 times. We're working through that. It is ultimately a vehicle detection issue. But that's what pedestrian recall means, meaning that intersection would cycle, all hours of the day, okay? So that is the impact at certain intersections of allowing pedestrian recall. Similarly, I recall 3-4 years ago when we installed the new traffic signals at Bedford Highway by the car dealership, and that's for those of you who don't know the area, that's the intersection closest to the Fairview overpass. A few days after those traffic signals were installed or commissioned, I should say, we were getting complaints about traffic backups, and sure enough, it was the detection system that had failed, resulting in traffic backing up on the Bedford Highway to Kearney Lake Road. And again, that is the impact if in fact there was pedestrian recall at that intersection, that would be the impact. And finally, we received a complaint one time about the intersection at the bridge at Wise and Nantucket about something's really going wrong here. All of a sudden there's backups when there's no backups that existed, or there's longer backups. We troubleshooted, we found out that one of the pedestrian push buttons was damaged, thereby putting in a call every time for a walk signal, which had a significant impact to the intersection. So we took that in consideration when we came up with the list that is before you. And I should point out, and once this is implemented, then we're going to have to review and determine whether or not it's still appropriate. But at this point, based on looking at all of the intersections, we believe that this is a reasonable approach going forward. Next slide. So our colleagues at Strategic Transportation Planning have built a model for the Portland Street corridor. This is in line with the current work that's being done for the Portland Street Functional Plan. And as councillors know, especially the councillors in the Dartmouth area, Portland Street is quite congested, and there's other projects that are in flight with respect to how to reallocate the space for other uses, including the potential future connection of Shearwater, I should say. And so they built a model that shows the existing conditions of Portland Street. And so what I asked them to do is to pick a intersection along Portland Street where has very low pedestrian crossing demand from the side street, and in order to show a snapshot of impact at a single location for a single period of time, keeping in mind that the total impact would be compounded along the entire corridor and over the entire day. So next slide. So this is a summary of the results, and I must point out that this is a conservative estimate, and it does not take in consideration intersections upstream and downstream of this intersection. As I mentioned earlier, all of these intersections work together. So if you look at the AM peak and the columns that are highlighted in blue, and I'll focus on the queue length because that is more, I find it's easier to picture that versus delay per vehicle. So during the AM peak, where the predominant movement is in the westbound direction, meaning heading into town, under the existing scenario, we have a queue length of 105 meters. If we were to implement pedestrian recall, that queue length would increase to 165 meters. Similarly, in the PM peak, which is the eastbound outbound direction that I'm focusing on, we're going from an existing condition of 141 meters to 223 meters, which is quite significant. Next slide. Other jurisdictions follow essentially the same process as HRM. We collected information from 18 jurisdictions across Canada. We found that there was no blanket approach to push button use for all intersections, and that was not surprising because each location has its own requirements. So signal operation, you cannot take a cookie cutter approach, meaning that what works in one location doesn't necessarily work in another location. And intersections in downtown areas and or where pedestrian activity is high do not require a button to be pressed. So that was consistent with what we currently have here in HRM, albeit with the exception of downtown Dartmouth, which we highlighted in a previous report, that is one of our priority locations to implement pedestrian recall. Next slide. Intersections on high volume roadways with low pedestrian activity or during times where pedestrian activity was low required a push button to be pressed. Again, that is consistent with what we're proposing here. And that, the examples that I used just now with respect to, Bedford Highway and Pleasant Street follow along those lines. And again, HRM's current approach is consistent with the general practice across Canada. Next slide. So in summary, what we're proposing is implementing changes at 145 intersections, which would bring the total number of intersections to 72%. Currently, we have the staff to do the work. We anticipate completing the programming changes by the end of September. Decals will be required to be produced and applied at all intersections. That work cannot happen right now. We're going to have to wait to the spring and summer to do that because the decals cannot be stuck in cold weather. And we can proceed with the changes to the accessible pedestrian signals right away. And that would have to be done by visiting each site and adjusting the programming manually at each location. And I believe that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to take any questions.
That's terrific. Thank you, Brad and Tasso and your team. That was very helpful, and we certainly will, just to share with all members of the committee, that Staff will be sharing that presentation with us so that you have a chance to review or extract any information you might like. With that, maybe we'll now move to questions. If we would have you identify in the chat. I see there's a question. Is that from you, Tony? I think so.
Yes, it is, Madam Chair. Does the motion have to go on the floor, or did it go on the last meeting and then when to be deferred it? I can't remember.
I think at this point we're just asked. I'm assuming we're opening this up to questions around the presentation.
So then wouldn't that say that the motion should go on the floor? But I'm just asking, has the motion been on the floor?
The clerk can clarify that.
Yes, Madam Chair, the motion does need to go on the floor because it was deferred since the last meeting.
Thank you.
Well, I can do that for you, Madam Chair, if you wish.
Thank you, Councillor Mancini. I appreciate it.
So the motion that the Transportation Standing Committee recommend that the Traffic Authority 1 implement changes to traffic signal programming at 93 synchronized intersections to activate automatic display of pedestrian walk signal without requiring pedestrians to use the push button for all crosswalks, 23 locations, or side street only crosswalks, 70 locations, as indicated in attachment 1 of the January 12th, 2021 report, and 2, adjust active times of 144 signalized intersections such that the push button will not be required to be pressed to activate the pedestrian signal between 6 a.m. and midnight, which is 12 a.m., except to activate the audible tone where accessible pedestrian signals are also present. And 3, adjust the programming of the accessible pedestrian signals at all locations to remove the requirement for the push button to be held for 3 seconds to activate the audible tone, allow for signal press activation. So moved.
Second.
Thank you. I think there was a second. I'm not sure. It was very low.
Tim, second. Sorry, I'm not usually quiet.
Okay. Councillor Oathip, thank you for your second. And would you like to speak to this now, Tony?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Yes, and saying that we didn't hear Tim out here is something I've never heard before. But anyhow, that's another story. First of all, Brad, Tasso, and your team, great work, fantastic work. We've heard from, well, at least I've heard from day one, making pedestrians first is something I've heard from day one in this job. So I think this is a step in the right direction. I have a question, Tasso, around the accessible pedestrian signal changes. So you made those changes in consultation with the accessibility community. Once you're now that you're recommending those changes, have you had feedback from the accessible community? Because again, for me to speak for someone that's has mobility issues is really something I shouldn't be doing. So I'm just wondering what that conversation was like.
Madam Chair, through you to the councillor. So we did meet on a couple of occasions with Walk and Roll Halifax, and part of that group has a couple of members that are blind or visually impaired. And through the discussions through that group, we're bringing forward the recommendation. If you're asking whether or not it went through the accessible or HRM Accessible Advisor Committee, then no, it did not go through that forum. It's just based on some discussions that we had with individual members of the visually impaired community.
So that's an interesting point also, and colleagues on the committee. I mean, should we not get some feedback from that group? I mean, for me, I look at that and what you share with me, Tasso, makes sense, but I don't have an issue, I don't have mobility issues. So should we, whether we pass this or not, or I'm not suggesting we delay it, but should we not have their feedback? Wouldn't that be an appropriate thing to do? Or I'd like to hear from my colleagues on that when they speak to it anyway, Tasso. So maybe we'll put that aside for now. That'd be great. My other question is, so there's no shortage of opinions on this. We receive lots of correspondence, and there are those that think, pedestrian recall should be across the municipality. And I know in one of your slides, you brought up the challenge to trying to do that. I wonder if you could just speak to that again. why not across, especially, obviously the rural area is less of an issue, but in the suburban area, I think where the issue becomes even greater. Could you just speak to that, please? Why not across both the core, the urban area and the suburban area?
Madam Chair, through you to the councillor, as I said earlier, we have to balance the need of all road users, and in some areas we have significant challenges. Okay, and you have to look at whether it makes sense to implement a pedestrian. So a couple things: implement pedestrian recall at locations where there's very little pedestrian movement. Okay. So the case in point with the councillor, Councillor Kent or Madam Chair Kent, at Pleasant Street, Highway 111, there is that's a terminus to a highway, very little pedestrian activity. It does not make sense to put pedestrian recall there, okay? And real live example, we already heard from the community about complaining about that location and how it's impacted the road network at that location, okay? The other flip side to that, we have other locations that are so congested that we need to maximize every second that is available to us to make that intersection work. Examples that come to mind is one that I brought for the intersection at the bridgehead, Wise-Nantucket, big intersections like Woodlawn, Portland, which is operating at capacity. Forest Hills and Main Street is we probably receive more complaints about Forest Hills and Main Street than any other intersection in the city, right. And it's operating at maximum capacity, and there's very little pedestrians moving. If pedestrian phases were to brought on a recall at that intersection, that would make the intersection fail. So you have this, it goes back to what I said earlier, you can't take a cookie cutter approach to every signal timing. You have to look at things in isolation and what makes sense, okay? And what we're bringing forward is, in my view, a very reasonable plan to provide pedestrian recall where possible. Okay, without impacting those movements. Because when you think about that, people automatically think about the vehicle traffic, which consideration, but those main arteries are also for your transit, your emergency response, for all of these other modes of transportation as well, goods movement as well.
Yeah, thank you.
If I could, just to tie that full circle back to the pedestrian, one of the key concerns here is excessive congestion will lead to road safety issues for those vulnerable road users. And we see this time and time again. And so why we want to tie it back to, when we think about pedestrian first, we have to think first about road safety and the aggressive driving, distracted driving, and shortcutting. That of course every councillor is seeing in their neighborhood. So that's the balance we're trying to achieve here by keeping the corridors, which is part of the IMP strategy, is to keep the corridors flowing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know my time is up, Madam Chair. I'll come back. Councillor Brad, thank you. I think it was just really important to emphasize that point. I'll come back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'd just like to welcome Councillor Mason. He has joined us, although it was late, and I'm going to say that he has suggested that I'm able to stay in the chair position. Don't know if that's strategic or being thoughtful. So.
Well, I mean, like, if we're being honest, both the chair and vice chair have a lot to say on every issue, right? So there's no winning, no matter which one of us is up there. But since I have that other motion, I think it makes sense for you to continue as chair if that's the will of the committee. For me, I just wanted to chime in and first thank the committee for its indulgence. I was supporting staff in an engagement with the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs, and that's what kept me this morning. Or this afternoon. And I want to thank staff for this report. And I'm being very deliberate about the language that I'm using, because we have gotten a lot of communication, and some of it very passionate, and I understand the passion, and some of it very angry, which I don't understand from some members of the public, especially those involved with some of the pedestrian safety special interest groups. But I want to emphasize that staff has done exactly what council asked. What the committee asked for, what my motion asked for, was look at where the math shows, StatsCan shows people walk and take transit the most, and have a look at that and see whether or not the way we are delivering, pedestrian services here, the pedestrian recall makes sense. And clearly, in some cases, when you do a systematic review, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that you have to press a button in downtown Dartmouth. And additionally, staff have been very open. And when we were discussing this, one of the things that came up is that the timing is now talking about being adjusted so that you don't have to start pressing a button before transit shuts down around 11 o'clock, right? That it doesn't make sense to have it stop in these downtown cores earlier than that. But for me, the core of why I asked for this was because what I was seeing with my own eyes, the whole municipality is not the same, right? Rural, suburban, urban, different. In my district, 70 to 80% of the people walk or bike to work. They don't take their car, and they do that to get around all the time. And so I would see people at the corner of the two that stood out were Jubilee and where it turns into Memorial crossing Roby, and on South Park and Spring Garden Road. At 7 o'clock, you had to press a button, and if you got to the intersection and it didn't give you a signal, you walked anyway. You walked. Of course you did. You didn't wait. You didn't press the button and wait for the entire thing to cycle and then go. And what that meant, especially the way they've changed the laws and the fines, is that if you got hit by a car, you'd get a ticket, not the car. That doesn't make any sense to me in an urban setting. So I want to emphasize, staff have done exactly what we asked for. It doesn't mean we have to stop there, right? I mean, if it was very interesting in the last committee meeting that some of the suburban councillors and rural commuter shed councillors were saying, well, why not here, right? So, I think continuing with this idea of a systematic approach, I support what I see in front of me. It makes sense to me. It makes sense that on busy corridors you have to press a button. But in the busiest pedestrian areas, you never have to press a button until after 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, wherever we landed. I don't have the report open in front of me. It makes sense to me. But I think if we can articulate, also there's these certain commercial areas and central areas where there's more pedestrians walking around in these other areas, maybe we need to reconsider that. But I would caution, I think the numbers need to be there. We need to either be able to show people are walking more than we think, or that we think they would walk more if we made it more pedestrian friendly. But what we don't want to do is make it so cars are waiting and there's no pedestrians all the time, everywhere. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I don't think that's environmental. I don't think that's good for our residents. So I'm interested to hear what the committee has to say about. Thank you, staff. You came back. It was a champion report, and I'm very pleased with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have had a request from our guest, Mr. Councillor Cleary, to speak after committee members, so I just make sure I haven't missed anyone's request for a question. I would like to offer a response. I can go before or after Councillor Cleary. So I think at this point I will call you forward, Sean.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and ditto to what Councillor Mason just said, and to some of the comments that Councillor Mancini mentioned earlier. And I do feel like staff have crafted something that is workable here, although it's funny, through Mr. Kouchoulakis's and through Mr. Anguish's comments, I almost feel like we had to drag them kicking and screaming. I feel like we're in a position where we have to defend the unanimously adopted IMP, and we don't have maybe full support from our staff on prioritizing pedestrians. I heard Mr. Anguish say that the congestion causes distracted driving. And if he could provide the committee and council with the studies that indicate that, I'd like to see those, because I'm looking at an article from Accident Analysis and Prevention that actually says the opposite, that distracted driving, through one of the studies they did, can impede traffic flow, but I haven't found any articles that say congestion causes distracted driving. I live on Quinpool Road near a corner of Connaught, and we have pedestrian recall there. And there's about 50, or anyway, the measurements before COVID, there's about 55,000 vehicles a day outside my door, and I'm on a main road for fire, police, and ambulance because of my location. And there's never been an issue with congestion or emergency vehicles not being able to get through Quinpool Road in this area or any other area of Quinpool Road. And most of it has pedestrian recall, with the exception of the half signals. And I do have a question for staff on that. So I just want to make sure that, you know, I'm expressing what I'm saying here. I like what's in front of us. I hope the committee will support this and move it through. But I feel like staff need to be a little bit more supportive of the idea and not kind of shoot it down as they're presenting it. So with regard to the half signals, can Mr. Koutsoulakis perhaps just comment on, given your comments regarding the prioritization of vehicles through Quinpool, would it likely be that we could ever reduce the timings so that you don't have to wait until the red lights on either side, say Beach Street, for example, where you could push it and then within a matter of seconds be able to cross? Is that a possibility at any time during the day, you know, outside of, say, peak periods?
Madam Chair, through to the councillor. Yes, we can take that away, councillor, and have a look at that, which is, it's slightly outside the scope of the reports. I didn't really look at that, you know, during what time period Quinpool Road is coordination. If I had to guess, though, Quinpool Road is probably in coordination for all daytime hours, from like an 8 to 8 or 9 to 9, because of the fact that it's a quite, even though the flow is unidirectional in the peaks, during the off-peak periods in between, the volume, the flow may change, but the volume is somewhat consistent. Like Quinpool Road is one of these odd corridors because it's not only a main corridor into the peninsula, but it's also a business district. So if I'm just going by memory here, Councillor, so maybe may have my facts wrong, but you know, even though there's the peak periods, but the off-peak period, like say around noon, around lunchtime, between 11 and 1, it is pretty busy as it is. And then the peak periods on Quinpool Road start way earlier than other areas. Typically around 3 o'clock is when traffic ramps up on Quinpool Road. So we can take that away to see whether or not we can relax that during certain time frames during the daytime hours. Absolutely.
Thank you. I'll follow up with you offline. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you, Councillor Cleary. We now call on Councillor Russell.
Thank you very much. I echo the comments that this is a fantastic report. I appreciate the inventory that has been made of the intersections and the suggestions about where you're going to be having new pedestrian recall. And I'm curious about the selection process for those where it was done as all crossings versus side street only crossings. I've noticed 5 locations within District 15 where I think it would make sense to consider having it at all crossings instead of just the side street only crossings, and these are in areas of higher population density. And I'm just wondering if that was what caused the decision to be made between, again, all crossings or side street only crossings. If you wouldn't mind responding to that first.
Madam Chair, through to the councillor. Without the specific locations, I cannot comment, councillor, but if we want to take this offline and share with us the locations you're speaking of, then we can provide the feedback appropriately.
Okay, thank you. I have just pasted those locations into the chat. I was actually wondering about just what the criteria was initially for the selection, but
okay.
If I was going to where the motion mentions updating it for all crosswalks at 23 locations or side street only at 70 locations, I would like to move 5 of those 70 into the 23 locations. Is that something that I would need to do through amending the motion, or would that be able to be done through the discussion afterwards? That's
Madam Chair, through to the councillor. That could be done afterwards, councillor. After we can discuss it, we can give you the reasons why. As you can see, the motion was crafted in such a way that you're recommending to the traffic authority recommend. I can't remember the exact word. The committee's recommending the traffic authority consider changing these, because ultimately the decision to change signal time resides with the traffic authority. So we can take those away and we can discuss and we can provide our answer offline. That's fine. And if there's merit in what you're providing, then just like any other traffic control request that is brought forward through your district, we can look at that.
okay. And I guess we can also talk about what caused the priority or the criteria to indicate that it was all crossings versus side street only. Great. I will send you an email about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I will take a moment just to express a little bit on my first crack at this. I'm pleased to see this type of change. Of course, it would I need to say that anything that improves our road safety and reduces the aggressive driving and shortcutting is to me a very positive step. I appreciate I also appreciate the systematic approach to this. I know we have had some contact around why would we not be looking at it more sweeping and have it consistent. I think that when it comes to traffic and pedestrian safety, autopilot, where you know exactly what you need to do in every single circumstance, is not always your friend when it comes to being safe within a traffic environment when you have cars up against human beings. So I'm okay with the notion that you have to be aware of your surroundings when you get to a crossing that determines what your next step is as a pedestrian, because you will not win against a vehicle. So I'm good with that. I also think there's a lot of benefit to doing this in a systematic way that we learn from the implementation over a phased in time, and then make adjustments as we go. I also, I just want to have a comment from staff around we had a fairly lengthy submission from a cycling group, certainly a representative from a cycling group, and I know there were some concerns expressed. I just wondered if staff have had a chance to look at that, and if there is a way to make a commitment to these folks to have some form of feedback, and if there is any next steps in potential that if we do find that this group of people who are choosing active transportation will come up with challenges related to this, are we open to having those reviewed and potentially addressed, if obviously at the will of the committee and council. So I don't have the report, that submission in front of me, but I believe it was provided to staff. If you could just comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, Madam Chair, I apologize. I did not see the report. I must have missed it. But we can take that away, and if I don't have it, I'll reach out to the clerk's office to get a copy. Okay. But is it related to what we are proposing currently, and they have concerns? Is that what it is? Yes, and my apologies. It might have just come through emails through to us. As you can imagine, we all get a lot of them, and sometimes it gets confusing of which group, which way it went through. But if the clerk doesn't have it, I'll make sure that we do put it through that vein and get it to you. But yes, it's around this particular motion. So I'll follow up on that. Okay. Just so, yeah, we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to be heard and considered.
And with that, I think now I'm not seeing any other first speakers, so I'll now offer the floor to you again, Councillor Mancini.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're doing such a better job than the other chair that we have. Anyhow, that's just my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. A few questions here. So, in the report attached from 1, you've identified all the streets where we're going to be adding the pedestrian recall. So I'm wondering what the process is. It's kind of building on Councillor Russell's. Councillor Russell suggesting more streets have the pedestrian recall. If we come across issues or perceived issues at any of these intersections or streets, what's the process to address those? Whether whatever the issue may be, wanting to add it to a street that doesn't have it, or there's a problem with the perceived problem. What is that process?
Yes, Councillor. Just like any other traffic control requests, send it to staff and we will evaluate. I do anticipate some complaints coming out of this. I just want to be upfront. You have those that want more, and you have those that want less, and that's the nature of the business, and I've learned to accept that. So again, it's a balancing act. We're trying to do our best. If there's any site-specific locations if you have concerns with, or somebody has concerns with, they can fire to the staff and we'll have a look. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I didn't have any. I just anticipating those complaints or concerns, Tasso, I just wanted to understand what's the best approach. That's great. So that leads into my next question. So once if this is passed, and it sounds like it's going to be passed, as it should be, is there going to be a broad communications strategy done with our residents? I personally would love to see, like Brad showed us the IMP video, that something like that is done to explaining what we're doing, trying to be proactive and explaining some of the concerns people might have, like the example of wanting a blanket pedestrian recall right across HRM. And so is there a way that we can try to get ahead of that and explain what we're trying to accomplish, the good of it, and anticipate the challenges? Is there a strategy in place, or do we need a motion to create that?
Yes, Councillor, yeah, there will be a communication related to this once we get kicked off. How it looks like, I can't answer that right now, but it is on our radar that's going to be part of the plan. Yeah, I mean, part of it is, we have to do it in stages, and as I spoke to earlier, the programming piece, because of the fact that most of our network is, we have remote access to it, so we can do the programming from our offices.
Right.
The big piece is, which is actually a community engagement piece, is creating the stickers to have staff go around and put them on the poles, which you can appreciate there probably hundreds of them that were going to be required. So as part of that, so that's one piece, but the plan was to have some type of communication strategy in advance of implementation.
I ask, and I know the Madam Chair would say the same, but please not make it our typical communication strategy, which is a lot of words and technical words, and graphics are great, simple language, and leading, that IMP is supporting all of this is my request. Earlier on when I spoke the first time around, Madam Chair, I did ask about the accessibility committee. I feel that just the presentation that you and Brad did today, just that alone would, and not that we're asking for their approval, but just so they clearly understand what is going forward. Do we need a motion or to make that happen, just to have you present to that committee this exact same presentation? Or that's just something you'll perhaps take away, because I think there's value to that.
Councillor, absolutely. We'll take that away and we'll make it happen. Thank you.
And then the last thing, just to clarify, this doesn't have to go to regional council, correct? If a decision is made today to move forward as it should, we're off to the races. Is that correct?
Yes.
Good. Those are my questions, Madam Chair. Thank you. Brad, Tasso, and your team, thank you very much for this stuff.
Thank you, Councillor. I see that Councillor Russell would like another opportunity to question.
Thank you very much. Just one last question. The stickers that you're talking about putting on all of the lampposts to indicate the direction about the push buttons, will they be tactile? Will someone who is sight impaired be able to make use of them?
The plan is not to make them tactile because somebody who's visually impaired or blind would still need to push the button to get the audible signal. And the audible signal itself has a tactile arrow on it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions, but I would like to offer support to the notion around being creative and up to date on how we communicate this. Reiterate Councillor Mancini's point of, I think that a lot of text just doesn't do the trick. As soon as I saw that IMP video, I said, okay, I have to have that. People will respond to that. People will want to watch it and see what it's all about. So if we could be creative like that, I think that that's the way to move forward. I'm just one more chance to have an opportunity to speak, and I'm not seeing any. So the next step would be to call for the question.
Question. Thanks.
Question has been called for. So all in favor say aye.
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 Suppose nay. And the motion is carried. Thank you very much for that work, staff.
Way basic. Good job, buddy.
Okay, we're moving on to item number 9, notices of tabled matters. We have none, so we can move forward with correspondence, petitions, and delegations. So, Madam Clerk, would we have received any correspondence that we should identify today?
Yes, Madam Chair, the Transportation Standing Committee received correspondence for items 8.1, 12.1.2, as well as one piece of general correspondence.
Thank you. Don't see any reason why we have anything coming forward. No, nobody's drawing attention to that. So we'll move forward with, nothing else I need to do there, right?
No, there's not.
Okay, thank you. So 10.2 petitions. And are there any petitions? Has the clerk received any, or any councillors that would like to bring some forward today?
The clerk's office hasn't received any petitions.
And seeing no notices from our members, we'll move on to presentations. We have no presentations beyond the staff that are identified for reports. So we'll move to information items brought forward, and we have none of those. Now we'll take up reports. So we have a staff report of 12.1 regarding Student Transit Pass Pilot Program, and I understand there will be a presentation.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Transportation Standing Committee. My name is Erin Blay. I'm the Supervisor of Service Design and Project of Halifax Transit, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk about this pilot project and new partnership. Next slide. At the August 13th, 2019 meeting of Halifax Regional Council, the following motion was passed. Direct the CAO to begin planning for a student transit pass pilot program by meeting with HRCE and CSAP officials to discuss potential partnership opportunities, program details, timelines, logistics, marketing, and costs. This was inspired by a recent program launched in Kingston, Ontario, and also direction provided by the Integrated Mobility Plan, which asks staff to develop relationships with school boards and post-secondary institutions in order to promote active transportation and transit. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background. In 2012, Kingston approved a pilot project that provided grade 9 students with fully subsidized transit passes. Today, all high school students in Kingston receive free transit passes, along with an onboard orientation session to teach them how to ride the bus. Since this was implemented, Kingston has also approved ages 14 and under riding transit for free. So that means basically if you're a young person in Kingston, you don't pay for transit until you're over 18. In the program's pilot year, students accounted for about 28,000 rides, and since then that number has grown to over 600,000 rides a year, which represents about 10% of their overall ridership. And since the launch of the program, Kingston Transit's ridership overall has been increased by 73%. Next slide. A little bit more background. The cost to provide the passes has been identified by the city as about $250,000 a year for all students. That's for all students at all high schools. And this is a combination of revenue loss as well as the new service required to deliver. Ongoing sources, so this is funded from the school boards and some provincial funding as well. However, Kingston Transit notes they do have a revenue loss each year as well, they project. Next slide. So since being provided direction to council, we've been working away, although discussions have been slightly delayed by COVID. As you can appreciate, the school boards have had some other priorities, but we've had some great conversations and are here today with an idea for a way forward. Next slide. So as per the staff report, we're recommending today a phased approach to program rollout as described in the next couple of slides. This phased approach is recommended in order to help us as staff understand the cost of the program and the impact that all these additional riders at school dismissal times might have on our capacity and our existing ridership. Next slide. So phase one, for the first phase, we're recommending that 4 schools be included in the pilot. So that's 1 grade at each of the 4 schools. The schools were chosen for their proximity to transit routes, the student population, as well as the ability for our existing service levels to provide capacity for those students. So we also, through discussions with the school board, determined that the best age category to try identify and specify with this pilot is grade 9 and 10, because it's when, you know, they're attending a new school, they're sort of finding their independence, they're not yet driving. This seems like a great time to get some young people on the bus. So the staff report is recommending 4 schools. That would be grade 10 students at Prince Andrew High, grade 9 students at Dartmouth High, grade 9 students at École de Sommet, and grade 9 students at École Mosaïque. Please excuse my poor accent. So another important point about what's being recommended in the first phase is that no fees are going to be levied against either HRCE or CSAP, but HRM staff will negotiate in agreement with each of the boards moving forward into pilot phase 2. We anticipate that phase 1 will last between 6 and 18 months, and we aim to get the program launched very quickly, probably within the next 2 months. The whole intention with this phase here is to be flexible and gives us an opportunity to adapt the program as we need, based on what we're seeing on the road every day. And it also gives us some time to negotiate an appropriate funding agreement ahead of the next phase. Next slide, please. So just a bit of rationale on why we've recommended this approach. It's because we're really exploring this program kind of in a vacuum of information. We don't really know how many students are currently using the bus, how many would be using the bus, and therefore we don't kind of know what the potential revenue loss might be. We don't know kind of what the travel patterns are, and we don't have a great sense of really how the students will be using the bus. So this phased-in approach is intended to help transit staff manage our risk that a larger rollout would expose us to in terms of overloads and potentials for revenue loss. Worthy of note though, HRCE in particular has expressed a strong desire to skip phase 1 and move right into phase 2. They're really eager to roll this program out as quickly as possible, and we're excited too. Next slide, please. So in phase 2, we would see an expanded pilot program in which all students at the 4 schools listed would be enrolled in the program. So that's all students would be eligible. And we're thinking we could also extend it for another 3 to 6 additional high schools. So that would be, you know, doubling, tripling, quadrupling the size of the program. For this to work, we anticipate having a funding agreement in place similar to what we have for the UPass to help us offset the cost of any required additional trips that we will need to carry those extra passengers. It's kind of tough for us to say what that cost might be at this point, but that's what we aim to learn through phase 1. Next slide, please. So as I noted on the previous slide, we anticipate that a formal funding agreement will be required in the next couple of months. And it's our intent to return to council within 12 months. That said, it's likely that it'll be quite a bit sooner because there is significant interest in rolling this out into a more fulsome program in the shorter term. Next slide. So the longer term goal is basically to roll this program out to high schools, maybe even middle schools that are well served by Halifax Transit within our service area. It's kind of TBD, but there's a lot of enthusiasm on all sides. Next slide. Financial implications. This is always a fun slide, right? So we anticipate that there are about 530 students that would be participating in the first phase. So again, that's the grade 9 or grade 10 students at each of the 4 schools. We have an anticipated revenue loss of between $16,000 and $24,000 for the year of the pilot. We're thinking it's likely on the lower end of this range right now, just due to the impact of COVID on our ridership levels right now. The potential loss does, though, vary based on kind of how frequently students are paying for transit now versus how much they will not be paying when they ride in the future, and the length of the pilot. Long-term revenue loss beyond pilot phase 1 is not expected based on the funding agreement that we plan to negotiate. Once pilot phase 2 with the school boards, it's expected that we'll recoup any revenue loss and potentially even increase future revenues. But again, this is all subject to the negotiation of fares and the contracts, as well as to how much service we'll need to add in order to meet the demand. Next slide, please. In terms of next steps, so pending approval of the bylaw amendments required as described in the report, we would be looking to launch this first phase very quickly, likely in late March, probably April we're looking at now. And that includes rolling out the passes. So that's likely just a sticker on the student's ID card, much like the UPass works now. But it also includes onboard training sessions, kind of some orientation, how to read the rider's guide, how to read a map, how to plan your trips. Just making sure all the students have the tools that they need to make good use of our network. And let's see. And we also plan to kick off the discussions around the funding agreement kind of as soon as possible, as soon as we start to collect some data to understand the impact the students are having on our network. Next slide. So the staff recommendation is, as you see on the screen, basically approve the program as described in the report and adopt bylaw U108, which amends bylaw U100, which is the user charges bylaw. Attachment B to the report shows the proposed changes in markup. So if you're curious about that, that's attached to the report for your information. Next slide. And I think that's all I have for you today.
Thank you very much. See, we have a list of speakers. We will need the motion to be put on the floor, so I will leave it to our members to do that, and we'll start with Councillor Mason. Are you still?
I did click unmute and it didn't unmute. There we go. I move that, thank you, Madam Chair. I move the Transportation Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council, 1, adopt the Student Transit Pass Pilot Program as described in February 1, 2021 report, and 2, adopt the bylaw U108, the purpose of which is to amend bylaw U100, the user charges bylaw, to enable the Student Transit Pass Pilot Program as set out in attachment C of the report of the February 1, 2021 report. I so move.
Second by Mancini.
Seconded by Councillor Mancini. Thank you very much. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it's funny, I grew up in Dartmouth, but I'm a Navy brat, so we kept getting posted other places, Ottawa and Toronto and Norfolk and London, England. And yeah, when I was in high school in the 80s in Toronto, they gave you bus tickets to go to school. There was no school bus for high school kids. And I think past grade 8, you could get them until grade 7 and 8, you could get them, but it was a choice rather than forced on you. So I'm glad to see us getting to this point. It's very good the way you hid that laughter at my age, Ms. Blay. I appreciate that. So I think this is great, and it will work with a little bit of bumps along the way, not the least of which is that the school board now runs its own bus transit system and no longer has a single contract out to stock, right? So like this is a potential cost savings for them when we make it work, but it will be difficult to make it work along the way. I have no doubt. I have heard through school administration people at Citadel that there is great hesitancy about doing phase 1, and that their concern is that if they don't go kind of all in and they're mixing it for a year or two, that it's going to be hard to get whole families involved, and that ultimately you might have someone in grade 11 who's, you know, Citadel's a bad example of this, I guess, but in the far north end does get bused. So it could be that somebody's getting picked up from the family, but somebody younger has a bus ticket, for example, right? So if we're talking about accelerating phase 1 to get it over with as soon as possible to be able to address the hope for a broader program that we're hearing from HRCE, I am wondering why we don't just jump to that in September. And I heard some stuff about capacity, and I hear that, Aaron. I don't want you to think I'm not listening to that, but I also know we're probably not going to buy a bunch more buses and change a bunch of stuff between now and a year and a half from now, right? So I'm just kind of like what do we gain by waiting? Do we have resources we could put in there? How, like, is there a way to kind of jump into where I'm hearing those school principals and the administration want us to be?
Through the chair to the counselor, thank you. That's a great question, and it's fair. I mean, it's a bit of these kind of weird growing pains, right? Like where we start with one cohort, and I can appreciate that it might be challenging and for some families. I think what we need to learn, though, before we don't even know, it's possible that we have capacity on a number of routes to accommodate the demand tomorrow, but we kind of don't know until we try. And I think the challenge of launching something in the spring is we don't have the benefit of learning what the impact will be in the fall when our loads are typically highest anyway. So I think we have to kind of have the foot on the gas for sure, but also trying to manage the experience for our own passengers who maybe are already on, like, for example, Citadel's a great example because the Route 7 around bell time is crammed, right? We don't have the capacity. Now, what we might be able to do when we take a look at the trends is perhaps we can tweak a trip time here or there to make it a little easier to split that load. But no, there's no additional resources identified for us as part of the first stage of the pilot, at least.
All right. Well, I am going to support the motion as presented because the journey of 1,000 miles. What was it I said yesterday to somebody? The Brad will like this. The journey of 1,000 speed humps starts with the first school zone, right? Like we've got to start this process. But I do know there's a strong wish from HRCE and possibly CSAP, but I know HRCE would embrace the full program. So I think I would just say to the members of the committee, we need to brace for that because we may need to throw additional resources at that, you know, throughout the system, right? Not just on the number 7, but anywhere where people are using it, especially, you know, where I grew up in Dartmouth, I could see there being a lot of demand. And frankly, the demand is also going to be driven by the fact that the kids are going to want to have a pass because it gives them the freedom to get around without having to get money or their parents. So like it's going to be high demand. There's no doubt in my mind. So I will support it, but I think we need to be cognizant of that risk. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And the second speaker would be Councillor Mancini. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Aaron, thanks for the presentation. So, I so love it when staff step up for the presentation and say, I'm so excited about to give you this presentation. How awesome is that? So thank you, Aaron. Did you run today, Aaron?
I ran and I drank a lot of coffee.
Look at that. That's the enthusiasm and the excitement. So keep the coffee going, keep running, Aaron. Good job. Let's see. So during the pilot, is it just a special pass that the students would receive, and is it as simple as that, and they just show it?
Through the chair to the counselor. The intent is that we use a model similar to what we have for the U-Pass with the university students, where there's a sticker stuck onto the pass. So it just makes it easily identifiable, and it's kind of the same thing for our operators, that they'd be looking for the same thing. Okay.
HRCE excited about it? Well, no surprise there. However, you mentioned it in your presentation, the Kingston model, the school board coughed up some money. So is that conversation happening with HRCE?
Yes, absolutely. They're very amenable to helping support this program financially beyond the first phase. Once we roll into, so with phase the first phase, it is just the 4 schools. It is just 1 grade at each. So they're interested in providing some financial support into when all 4 schools, all of those students would qualify.
Okay, so the first phase, no, but when we get to the second phase, great. The last question, so does this model work? So what happens when school is not in? So the pass is not, it expires when it's in summer season, is that correct?
I believe it's actually, I'd have to go back and double check. I believe the intention is, at least for the pilot phase, that it will go through the summer because they would still have the valid card.
Right, so but once we get to phase 3 and we implement it, hopefully, then it just stops during when the school is out, is that correct?
I would think that we would have to negotiate that through the funding agreement. I don't know in the summer, there's capacity on the buses, so I don't necessarily see that it would be a problem that they would be overloading us then.
Do you know what they do with the Kingston model then?
Not off the top of my head. I believe it is an annual pass, though. I feel like it does go through the summer. I'm not sure, though.
No problem. Look, thanks again. I fully support this. I think this is very exciting. Great stuff, Aaron and the team. Keep running, and not too many coffee, though. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Oathead, your turn.
Thank you, Chair. And Aaron, just welcome back. I think this is only the second time we've seen you since you're back. I'm going to be a little difficult here today, but I'm going to be difficult for, I hope, I believe, to be the right reason. And the right reason is, I think this is a bit of a Mickey Mouse phase 1, to be honest with you. And I'm not a big fan of Mickey Mouse. And I think that, just grade 10s, just these schools, I could have seen just these schools, but just this grade, this school, have some kind of a way of differentiating grade 10. And for grade 11, are they going to try and sneak on, or they're going to have to pay if they're traveling with somebody in a different grade? We have this happening in other schools, other cities, so I would think there should be some data available there to figure out the impact it had. We are at 52% of ridership, and we're screaming for capacity. It's plummeted as a result of the lockdown and then people afraid of COVID since then. And I believe in striking while the iron's hot. If the HRCE says that they're excited about this and they'd like to move to phase 2 and they might be coming forward with some money, then go for it. And say, okay, well, HRCE, respectfully put your money where your mouth is. If you want us to move directly to phase 2, isn't that great motivation for getting around the table and discussing what money they're going to bring to the table? So I, respectfully, and I mean this, with humor and respectfully, I would be tempted to actually vote against this right now, with the idea being that you come back and do at least a proper evaluation of this at these schools, and not just, a grade per 4 schools or something. Either do a proper pilot at these schools, or make it available at more schools to test it. Use the data that you've seen in other cities to know the impact it's going to have, and use this to leverage serious discussions around the table with the HRCE, as Wei said, to get this in place by September with some serious contributions of money. So anyway, I told you it's going to be difficult, but I do believe it's well-intentioned being difficult. With all due respect to Mickey Mouse.
Don't be picking on Mickey Mouse, but thank you, Ms. Councillor Outhead. I see no other first speakers. So
I would like to get some feedback from Erin.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
My
it
apologies.
wasn't just a rant. There was a question in there.
Through the chair to the councillor, yeah, I can appreciate that. I think it is worth noting, though, the Kingston model did initiate with one grade as well, and they did work up. And I think while I echo, strike while the iron's hot, and they're a fantastic partner to work with. I think even just the fact of negotiating a financial contract like that will take a couple months anyway, whereas with this first phase, we can get that rolling probably in, pending council approval and the approval of the bylaw, we could get it rolling within a couple weeks. So I think I appreciate your concern, but I think it's worth saying that this is at this scale, we can.
I really think that we should take the time to do this right and launch it in September. But anyway, we'll see what others have to say. But nothing personal. I think it's a great idea, but I just think you're underestimating the potential and perhaps starting a little too small in my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I see that Councillor Russell would like a first chance at speaking.
Thank you, and I simply wanted to echo everything that Councillor Outhead said. If we are limiting it to grade 10 kids, that is some mix of grade 10 and any kids who have courses in grade 11 or grade 11 kids who have courses in grade 10. At least that's the way it was when I was younger, and I won't mention my age since it changes tomorrow.
You're 100 years old.
But I see no problem with also immediately moving to either include all of the grades in phase 1 or move immediately to phase 2. And I recognize that we don't have an agreement with HRCE yet, and I recognize that the funding amount would be a little bit higher if we're considering all grades in phase 1 than just grade 10 in phase 1. But I'm wondering how we would direct that pilot phase 1 has these changes, or that we move directly to pilot phase 2. Because at this point, the motion says we will move to a pilot program. And it is, and anybody who knows me knows that I hate ambiguous, and it doesn't specify if it's phase 1 or phase 2.
Through the chair, just as a point of clarification, so the motion does say pilot. I think that we were sort of thinking of the pilot as something happening without the presence of an agreement between ourselves and the school board. To your other question, though, I'm not sure how that would need to be amended in the motion to skip ahead to drawing up an agreement.
Okay. Do you have any expectation of a time frame of when you would have an agreement? Because again, phase 2, no problem with that. One of the pieces of it is the agreement with the HRCE and I think CSAP as well.
Right, through the chair, it's our intention to, as soon as we get phase 1 up and rolling, is to start the discussions about phase 2. I think our only hesitation would be that we want to kind of wait and see and observe the impact of the smaller group of students on the network before we kind of have a better sense of what where we might need to add some additional service, some additional trips. But beyond that, I feel like, I think we noted in the report we gave it a wide range between 6 and 18 months. So closer to the 6, I would hazard a guess.
Okay, my hope is that it would be closer to the 6. I get that it would be, I get that agreement would be necessary. And I think HRCE, if they are interested in moving this out, would be keen to put that agreement in place. Is it possible to implement phase 2 for just HRCE if, for example, there is no agreement with CSAP?
Through the chair, absolutely. We would have to have a separate agreement with each organization anyway. So I don't see that would be a problem. Our conversations with CSAP haven't been ongoing for quite as long, so we need to have a more fulsome conversation around the funding and what they would be comfortable with, but there's no reason we couldn't go ahead with one and not the other.
Okay, super. I was just hoping that you wouldn't hold one off. So again, what would it take to have it for all grades in phase 1? Is that something that you would do, or would you need a motion or an amendment or something?
I would think that we would probably need some additional direction. I think it might be actually an alternative within the report.
Okay.
Let me just double check here.
Yeah, I can jump in for a sec there. Dave Riggy, Executive Director, Halifax Transit, through the chair to the committee. That is one of the listed alternatives in the report, alternative number 2. And as written, it's the committee defer the matter for a supplementary report dealing with extending the student pass pilot program to all students from the 4 identified schools. So I think we would need some direction through moving that alternative to be able to take that further.
And so that would send it off, that would keep the status quo and send it off for a supplementary report. And in the meantime, nothing would change. That's correct.
I'm happy to second that, Paul, if you want to bring that forward, or do we have to defeat the one on the floor?
My concern is, yeah, my concern is the time frame that it would take to bring back that supplementary report.
Next month. Dave's not busy.
Okay, so can we just have clarification from legal or the clerk around what the process would be? Would we have to deal with the first motion and then bring this one forward, or is this an opportunity to amend it?
I would say that you could amend the motion to substitute, shoot, I'm just thinking, or actually, Colin, could they amend the original motion, or would they need to vote it down and adopt the second alternative?
The motion is already on the floor, so all they would need to do is bring a motion for deferral pending the supplementary staff report.
And that gets back to the timing of how long that report would take. It would be great to see this implemented. And so simply adding the extra grades to it, if it's an extended period before that report comes back, then I would rather see this go now.
So, Councillor Russell, we're running out of significantly over on your time. Okay. I think there are more councillors to hear from, unless you're ready to put something on the floor right now, which I will allow for, but otherwise we can carry on with comments. Maybe that'll help with your decision. It would be great to get an estimate on how long that report would take to come back. So I'll back off for now and would like to come back a little bit later and ask that. Thank you. Thank you. Staff, are you able to answer that now, or perhaps maybe after some other speakers you can offer it when you have the information?
Through the chair, yes, if I could have a few more minutes with that one, that would be great. Thank you. All right. So I have some comments in first round. I can't remember, and perhaps Councillor Russell or Councillor Mason, you can offer me this around guidance. Would it be normal for me as the chair to interject my first round of comments before or after you guys have had a second and third?
I think that's fine. I just wouldn't, you only really need to step down if you're going to move anything.
Yeah, no,
But if you're just putting in your thoughts, I think it's fine to do it now.
Okay, thanks, colleagues. So I'm pleased with the idea, the notion of it, and for anything that's removing barriers and bringing more ridership to our transit system, and we know our young people are anxious to get cars and things, but I think that given opportunities to understand the conveniences of transit, this is a good thing. I have questions around the phased approach as well. I'm okay with a phased approach. I do have the same concerns around the study group that we are looking at and And I feel like it is too small as well. I feel like we're cherry picking within only a few schools, only a few grades, and I'm not sure what we're actually going to get out at the end. If we are only limiting it to that, it's so many reasons why students may or may not use this. And I just feel like what we're presenting now is fraught with concerns around what data did we really collect, and what do we have to do next to get even a better one. So I'm certainly open to having more grades involved, and I think that really is the next best step. I don't mind as well having a little time lag in getting a report, because we do want, I mean, we're not going to get it perfect from the get-go, but we are looking at something that, especially if we haven't even engaged with the province to the degree of this kind of conversation, which we all know that doesn't move quickly, that we want to have real data to be able to share. And I think it's just the group is too small. A question I do have around the review of this. So we're saying that we would do this at 6 months. What do you have, like a criteria that you will apply to the data that comes in at the end of this that will determine success? Or is it kind of, what are you looking for to create what would be a success, and or a situation where it identifies we need more information, we need to do this again or expand it to get a really good report to come back to this committee or council for a full-on program, if that's where we go?
Sure, Madam Chair. Thank you. I think in any way it's a success. I guess after 6 months, when we're observing this, additional ridership and additional young people taking transit is success. I don't know that it's a success-fail evaluation that we'll be doing as so much as an understanding of what the impact is of those additional bums in seats. For example, is the Route 72 passing by the high school, is that now overloading? Are we leaving passengers on the street? Do we need to add 2 extra trips? If we do, that requires X number of dollars, and that would inform a funding agreement as part of phase 2. That's the type of information we're looking at. It's not as though we anticipate that, oh, this isn't working. I think it's more how we roll it out and how we inform the agreement, rather than, you know, whether that's a prudent next step, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. So I just want to let folks know that we are approaching 3 o'clock, so we'll need, I need to have some insight of whether there is an interest in extending this meeting. We still have 2 items that could potentially involve some dialogue. We still have 3 speakers on this. So is there a will of the committee to extend?
I move to extend, Tim.
Seconded, Councillor Russell.
Okay, do we need a vote on that one? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. So we'll extend to, we didn't put a timeline on it. We'll give it to 3:30 and then we'll revisit it and see how well this goes.
The only thing that's happening, Madam Chair, is the Councillor Outhead usually has his nap at 3 o'clock, so.
Who says I'm not having it?
Okay, let's get back to this. We've got a little, we got to make best use of this time. So we are now going into second round of questions, one from Councillor Mancini, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, Councillor Austin is paying attention online, and it's his question that I'd like to bring forward.
Didn't Iona want to speak? I thought I saw Iona wanted to speak for the first time. Sorry.
Oh, you are right. I missed that. I see that.
Councillor Stoddard.
Thank you, Councillor Mancini. Councillor Stoddard, we'll bring you forward. Can't hear you. Not sure if you're on mute. Councillor Stoddard, I'll give you one more shot, and then if not, we'll proceed with Councillor Mancini and come back to you. Oh, Amy?
Councillor Kent, she's actually out of the meeting, so she may have had technical issues. I was just trying to invite her back in.
Okay, well, we'll just move along, and hopefully when that comes, when she can come back on, or if she does, we'll make sure she has the opportunity. Thank you. Councillor Mancini.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Aaron, this question is actually from Councillor Austin, who's watching online. He's asking, what happens if you launch this program, say in May, and then those grade 9 students move to grade 10? Do they get a pass for 2 months and then lose it in September?
This is a great question. I think the intent of the program is that it stays with one cohort rather than with one specific grade. So I think we would stay with those grade 9s becoming grade 10 students, if that makes sense. All that said, that's something that I don't think we've really thought about all that much. So that's a good question. Some food for thought.
Well, you know, there's 2 great Dartmouth councillors and 50-50 chance for one of us to say something great. Yeah. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Councillor Mancini, and it appears that Councillor Stoddard is back. So Councillor Stoddard, you have the floor.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Councillor, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. I just wanted to say that this is an awesome report, and thank you very much, Aaron, and everyone that helped you on this, or if you did it independently. I'm just wondering if we would be able to start phase 1, where everyone is ready to go with this right now. And then as we get more information, maybe we could follow with phase 2 in less than 6 months.
Through the chair to the councillor, thank you so much for your kind words. Many hands over here, so teamwork makes the dream work. I think 6 months was kind of the number we had in mind for a couple of reasons. One of which is it would give us a little bit of time to observe the trends and see the impact on the network. And it'll also give us a little bit of time to negotiate the funding agreements that we would need in place ahead of phase 2. In the report we gave a pretty broad range of 6 to 18 months. We realistically think we'd be much closer to the 6 months if the program rolled out in April. That would put us close into the fall of this year. So we might be able to speed it up a little bit. Realistically, I just wouldn't want to overcommit or commit HRCE. I mean, that whole process of negotiating always takes a little bit more time than one would hope. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Just to confirm, are you finished, Councillor Stoddard? You're good?
I'm sorry?
I'm just confirming that you have no further questions.
Oh, I'm good. Thank you, Ms. Chair.
Thank you. And now Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think I was leaning toward let's just do this and ask for a sub-report and work it out in the future. But here's what I'm going to ask Ms. Blay is the school start time thing. Like, I think part of how this especially would play in is we need the administrators to have the time and the capacity to distribute the passes, saying this is someone who's had 2 high school age kids. The kids have to have not lost their pass yet, the little card that they get so we can put a sticker on it. They get a new card at the start of every year. I'm wondering if really the time to launch this is September and tied in better with their bus program, right? Like, I'm not sure a May launch works for them, and though there is a tightness in terms of timing, which is it's already the end of February, and if we're going to try and work with them on that under either circumstance, the first phase pilot as listed, or more broadly to all the grade levels, I'm pretty sure that they lock in their bus program and contracting in April, May, right? So we're on a tight timeline no matter how you cut it. But that was a long lead up to say I'm feeling like we should defer for a supplementary report and expand it to all grade levels for a September launch, which gives you a little more time, so you're not going to get off this call and go, what did they just do to me, to try and get it done by May. But I feel like starting on the school year makes a lot more sense for the pilot.
Through the chair to the counselor, I definitely appreciate that comment because we talk a lot about how our travel patterns change around the fall. I think one of the reasons we were so excited about getting going this spring rather than into the fall is a couple reasons. One, fall is crazy for transit, but it's also crazy for the school board. Like having an extra administrative task to undertake isn't something that we've talked to them about. They're really busy as well. But the second piece of that, and arguably the bigger piece, where this is kind of a learning experience for us, is that right now we have capacity on the buses. And we're seeing, our ridership creep up slowly. We're inching up, a little bit closer and closer every week towards where we are at in 2019. So we have the room on the buses now, and that's why we kind of wanted to get something going in, as soon as possible.
I could go either way. I'm not going to make the motion. I think that, we want to hit the ground running as soon as possible. I think getting students on the bus right now and giving them a pass that would work all summer is kind of a gift that, I like presents. So I could go either way. What I am worried about is that unless we had strong support from the school board, a September launch might also not work based on what Ms. Blay just said. So looking forward to hear what the rest of the committee has to say. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Russell?
Thank you. Going back to the question that I had earlier, wondering about the timing of a supplementary report. Do we know when that might be back by?
Through the chair, I think I will defer this question to someone who has a better sense of these things than I do. Patricia.
Patricia Hughes, Manager of Planning and Customer Engagement. So I think what we heard is that the supplemental report would be asking for council direction to jump right to phase 2. So if we were to come back with that, we would have some work to do with our partners beforehand in terms of funding agreements and nailing that down. So it would take several months. We wouldn't expect to be back with that for this school year, certainly not before June, possibly over the summer, but it may be optimistic, I would say, to have it in time for.
And if there was simply consideration for phase 1, but include all of the kids in those school, or all of the high school kids, so grade 10 and up, not just limited to grade 10. As an aside, I'll give you a couple of minutes to think. I agree that September is an absolutely crazy time for schools. Having been on the school board, the first day of school is busy, it's chaotic, and it settles down through the year. So if this pilot program is implemented before the September timeframe, I think the schools may appreciate it a little bit more, because then they could just roll it out in addition to everything else that they're rolling out on the first day. So hopefully that gave enough time to consider the expanded phase 1 of considering all of the grades instead of just grade 10.
Sure, through the chair, and Patricia, please feel free to jump in if I missed something, but if I understand correctly, you're suggesting that we open up phase 1 to include all the grades. Or what was your thought that would start this spring or into the fall?
Immediately.
Immediately. Okay, I think
when we are seeing phase 1 start now, the only change that I would see is that it would not just include grade 10, is that it would include all of the kids in the high schools that were mentioned.
Right, understood. So I think the risk with that is that there's, potential financial risk. We don't have a great sense of what the students are if they're paying fare now. There's potential for additional revenue loss. Although there is, as I mentioned, significant capacity on most routes right now to accommodate additional ridership. So from that perspective, the risk isn't as high, but there is significant risk for financial implications.
Absolutely, and I'm seeing in the financial implication section that phase 1 is it is between $16,000 and $24,000 times 3. We're at $48,000 to $72,000. So assuming grade 10, 11, 12.
Through the chair, it would be some of Ecole Mosaic has four or five grades in it. So depending on how you would slice it, would be some multiple of that number. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe if I could jump in through the chair. So just thinking about, what I think the committee is trying to do here, and trying to figure out the best way to kind of move forward with this. What we're thinking is that probably if the intent is to just do phase one, but with more kids, essentially, really the only thing that changes is the potential financial exposure. So I guess I'm gonna, I'm asking for the clerk and legal to weigh in as well, what our options might be. I'm just wondering if there's a way for us to avoid having to go away, do an entire supplemental staff report, which obviously takes time even just to go through processes. Is there an opportunity even to return at the next Transportation Standing Committee meeting with just that number, as an addendum to this report, rather than, again, going through the whole rigmarole of a staff report. So anyway, I'm not sure if there's a way to handle that, but I'll put that thought out there.
It's Colin here in legal. So I think, look, if you're capable of coming back at the next Transportation Standing Committee with a simple one-pager with the financial data, that constitutes, that can be your supplementary report. The report that you have now, Alternative 2, says that if council wants to extend this to all students from all the schools, that this report says you're not prepared to do that today, that you need to come back with a financial information. So I think being consistent, then yeah, you would need to come back, but it doesn't have to be, the scope of your supplementary report could be very limited, very specific.
Okay, so thanks for that, Colin. So yeah, I think if that's the direction the committee does choose to go, we should be able to bring something with that simple math change basically back for the next meeting of Transportation Standing Committee.
And that would be 4 weeks today. I'd like to make a motion to defer this so that we can consider.
I have, Councillor, you have absolutely run out of time again.
Okay.
And I'm going, and we do have another speaker, Councillor Oathit, and then I'll come back to you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Oathit.
Thank you. Just very quickly, and Paul can bring that motion forward. I'm happy to second it. I think this is a compromise. I mean, if things were easier in life, that I would love to see us go right to phase 2 for September. But I think I could get behind this idea. My worry is that by not doing this, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, if we didn't do this, that just using the grade 10s from those schools, I'm really worried that the sample size, the pilot size is too small. I don't know that we're really giving it a fair day in court, so to speak, because I'm quite excited about this and I want to support this. And if I could, I would probably be pushing for us to go right to phase 2 in September. But I think the expanded all grades in those schools for May or whenever it can happen is something I could support if Paul would like to bring that forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Russell.
Thank you. I would like to make a motion to defer the matter until the March 25th, 2021 meeting of the Transportation Standing Committee for a supplementary report dealing with extending the Student Pass pilot program to all students from the 4 identified schools. So moved.
So seconded, whatever.
Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Russell, seconded by Councillor Oathit.
Question.
And the question has been called. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Nay.
With apologies to Ms. Blake.
Carrying none. The motion is carried. Thank you for deferring.
Thank you very much.
Look at it as you got even more support than you wanted, Aaron.
Okay, with that, we're going to move directly into 12.1.2, winter maintenance to walking paths and regional parks. We are over time, so we want to make sure we keep rolling. And what's the will of committee?
I can make that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Russell.
Thank you. I move that the Transportation Standing Committee recommend that Regional Council direct the Chief Administrative Officer to 1, add Sir Sanford Fleming Park seawall pathway to the regional park pathways that are winter maintained in the 21-22 winter work season. 2, approve the park snow and ice removal guidelines attachment 2 for all regional park pathways receiving winter maintenance. 3, include the paving of main pathways in Sandy Lake Park, First Lake Regional Park, and Africville Park for consideration in the 2022-23 capital budget deliberations to further winter maintenance capabilities. And 4, undertake a review of the park pathways and guidelines in 5 years in association with the review of the Transportation and Public Works Winter Operations Service Review standards previously approved by Council. I so move.
Do we have a seconder?
Second, Councillor Mason.
Thank you.
This,
Councillor Russell, are you speaking to this?
I would like to, yes.
Yes, thank you.
I think this report is excellent. I think there are a lot of good things in it. I'm looking forward to all sorts of stuff. However, I would like to make a motion. I've spoken with the Friends of First Lake, with the folks who would take care of the paving. I've spoken with HRM staff who included First Lake Regional Park. We have never had a request for First Lake Regional Park snow clearing issues in 311 that we have been able to find. No users of that park have ever complained to me about the snow in the park, and the main reason to pave the pathways in the park would be to allow for better snow removal. We have a second situation where we have First Lake Regional Park around one part of the lake, and immediately next to it we have the unpaved pathway that goes through these Sackville Lakes Park and the Sackville Lakes Park, which is basically around Second Lake, but also includes a portion of First Lake. There is a third issue in that on one side of First Lake, we are just building a new pathway, and that pathway is going to be constructed to the current standards and have crusher dust on it. And the community is in support of the pathway somewhat. If we went in immediately and paved it, we would lose their support. So at this point, I would like to amend this motion to remove First Lake Regional Park from the list in item 3. So I guess that is an amendment.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to second that, but I'd also be open to see if the mover would be interested in a friendly amendment that I would add Sandy Lake to that as well. I've spoken with staff about that, and I have no desire at this time, and I've heard no desire from anyone to have pavement of the paths in Sandy Lake.
I'm happy to add Sandy Lake to that amendment as well. I wasn't sure if you wanted to move that as your own amendment later on.
This might be faster, so.
Thank you. I've also checked with Councillor Smith about Africville Park, and he is comfortable with that remaining in this motion.
Just want a clarification from Council, if I could, on process here. Reminder. We have an amendment motion. I think we deal with the amended motion first. Is that how we do that? Yeah, okay. So
we deal with the amendment to the motion first.
Yes. Amendment to the motion. Could we perhaps put that up?
The amendment is to remove Sandy Lake Park and First Lake Regional Park from point 3. Can I leave the wording for that to the clerk?
So that the motion, motion be amended to remove part 3 of the main motion?
It is not to remove part 3. It is to remove Sandy Lake Park and First Lake Regional Park from part 3.
My understanding is that Africville Park as well. Is that what Councillor Outhit had mentioned that Councillor Smith had requested? No? Okay, no, so I would, yeah, I will change that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have enough clarity? We'll have the question called. Thank you, Councillor Mancini, and all in favor of the amendment.
That was a question. I have a question.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Mancini.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is the first time I've seen this, and new to the committee. What's the origin of this motion? Did it come from a committee member? Is this coming from staff? Does anybody know?
I think it was a motion maybe brought forward by Sean originally to look at improving winter access to some of our regional parks, Tony.
All right, that's fine. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Madam Chair.
If I may, that is exactly where that came from, and I found this out through my discussion with staff about this. The reason that item 3 was included in the motion is because paving the parks, paving these portions of the parks was a relatively straightforward process, and it would simply make maintenance in those parks easier.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Okay. Colin is saying that originally February 27th, 2020 motion and transport committee. Sorry, I'm just, it's coming in fast and furious. Request a staff report that investigates advantages, disadvantages, and costs of providing winter maintenance to walking paths in regional parks, such as Sir Sanford Fleming Park.
I just shared that. That's from the origin of this report for Councillor Mancini as to where this was coming from.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm not seeing any other requests for speaking or questions. So is it the will of committee to call the question on the amendment to the main motion?
Now I'll call for the question.
Thank you, Councillor Mancini. You're so cooperative today. All in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. And now we will revert back to the main motion that has now been amended. Are there any further questions? Oh, I hear the call for the question on that. Just make sure we are all clear on what that is. Here we go. Question's been called. All in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The motion's carried. Thank you. With that, we will now move to members of the standing committee. There are none. Boards and committees, there are none. Motions. No, we have no motions. In camera, there are none. Added items. 15.1, Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that Transportation Standing Committee request a staff report recommending establishing new standards for municipal utility and abutter work in the right-of-way to ensure accessibility and detectability for pedestrians shall be maintained at all times. I so move.
Second.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. The intent of this motion is to address the complaints that we saw around the Roby busway work, especially at the intersection of Roby and North this summer, where all four corners of the intersection were having work done at once. And while we've come a long way the last 8 years in terms of construction mitigation and maintaining accessibility. In this case, you had loose gravel and crusher dust, and the ramp kind of scooped down, and it was more than a 12-1 ramp of crusher dust. And somebody in a manually operated wheelchair or with mobility issues in a walker or with leg strength issues or a amputee would have really struggled. And so we were getting slammed on the internet at that time, conveniently right before the election. So that's what everybody wants to see. And I did a little bit of research, and that's where the words in the motion come from. And staff will be familiar with the language that I use and what I'm requesting there, because many of the staff who would be involved with writing this report probably attended the CARSP 2016 conference in Halifax, and some of you probably went to the presentation by a fellow by the name of Tim Cox from Cox Transportation, who has given versions of this presentation at this conference about pedestrian safety and construction and whatnot for years. His presentation was building accessible temporary pedestrian pathways through sidewalk construction. And when you look at the standards that are being employed in both Ontario and in the United States because of the Americans with Disabilities Act, they go considerably beyond what we've been doing. So I think that we need to get a staff report regarding adopting similar standards. And I think it's better that we do them voluntarily than wait for them to be forced upon us by the Nova Scotia Accessibility Act. I think it's inevitable we're going to have to approach the standards that you see in other jurisdictions. So I'd like to just get on with it. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Question.
Question has been called for. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. Hearing none, the motion is carried. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing and hearing none. We'll move forward to the date of the next meeting being March 25th, 2021. Before we adjourn, though, I would like to take a moment to clarify my suggestion and question to staff around the cycling organization's request a submission. I can confirm that submission went in on January 21st, 2021 to the municipal clerk's office in relation to the pedestrian push button staff report. So that should be on file as a submission. And lastly, before we call for an adjournment motion, I would like to, on behalf of the committee, wish Councillor Russell a very happy birthday tomorrow. That you have the ability to enjoy your day and stay out of trouble.
Madam Chair, he may not realize this since he's also a relatively new councillor, but when it is your birthday, you are required to buy all of us a coffee.
I will absolutely do that, and I will deliver it to the budget committee meeting tomorrow.
Looks 60.
I was hoping you were going to say meet you at apartment 3 in an hour.
I would love to do that as well. Anybody who would be interested in coming out to apartment 3 here in Sackville, I will treat anybody in this meeting and any councillor to coffee or whatnot at apartment 3.
See you next week.
I think that's a date.
We haven't had a whatnot, Noel.
Thank you all.
It's a something. Listen, thank you all very much. Thanks for being
Good night,
kind.
all.
My first chairing.
you.
And we
John,
have
thank you.
a motion to adjourn.
Move
You're
to
awesome, baby.
adjourn.
Well, lots happening. Motion to adjourn. I don't know what everybody's saying, but I'm hoping it's all good. Thank
It's
you
all
again
good.
All good.
in making this journey possible today. Have a great and safe night. Take care.
Thank you.